So now we are ready to start the 10th session of the Durban Forum. So I will have now the pleasure to hand over the floor to the co-facilitators of this year's Durban Forum. Please, Shinaz Makoto, the floor is yours.
Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening. This is Makoto Kato from Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, Japan.
Welcome to the 10th Durban Forum on Capacity Building. I'm Shinaz Musa from the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, as well as South North. I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, where it is, I would say mid-afternoon, but no, it's like 1:30 in the afternoon. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'll be co-facilitating today's meeting, and Makoto Kato has already introduced himself. He's my co-facilitator. So like all of you, I'm really looking forward to a lively, productive and interactive discussion and session. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the session, I would like to invite Marianne Carlson, the SBI chair, who will give us a few words. So over to you, Marianne.
Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. I hope that you are safe and healthy during these challenging times. It is my honor to be here today at the 10th Durban Forum, bringing together parties, experts, and practitioners across the world. And thanks for joining and for your commitment to progress work. We wish we could have been in Bonn today. However, as COVID-19 continues to affect much of the world, we must do as we did last year, as we did during the June Momentum, to convene the Durban Forum in the only format available for us. Time zone differences and connectivity issues may pose challenges for some of you, and I wish to extend a particular thanks to those of you who are joining here today under somewhat difficult circumstances. And with regard to connectivity, let me assure you that the Secretariat is supporting you in all ways possible. And should you be as unfortunate to lose connection, the Secretariat will be there to help you back. We want all voices to be heard. Everyone must be included. The theme of this year's Durban Forum is capacity building for addressing climate and development goals coherently. This year's Durban Forum theme is aligned with the PCCB's annual focus area, which is building capacity to facilitate coherent implementation of nationally determined contributions in the context of national development plans. Now, the overarching objective of today's meeting is to facilitate the sharing of relevant knowledge, experiences, and lessons learned on capacity building efforts aimed at promoting greater coherence in achieving objectives of the Paris Agreement and fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals from the 2030 Agenda. Now, capacity building is a fundamental building block to incorporate climate action and SDGs into policy planning. Indeed, countries' capacity gaps can impede the coherent implementation of the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. Assessing capacity gaps and needs is crucial in building capacity for sustainable recovery from the current crisis as well. Moreover, capacity building for enhanced coordination across ministries, agencies, and governments is important to achieve the 2030 Agenda and meeting the climate change target. 2021 is a crucial year for climate ambition and action as countries continue communicating their updated NDCs. Capacity building to help countries align climate goals and SDG-relevant targets and share experience and good practices to mainstream climate and development into policy planning are therefore of utmost importance. The outcome of the discussions we have here today will be presented at the 5th meeting of the PCCB taking place next week. The PCCB will then take stock of these outcomes to assist them in identification of concrete action points and recommendations to the COP on issues relevant to the topics addressed today. I look forward to advancing this work and wish you all a very rich and a good exchange throughout this Durban Forum. Back to you, Shehnaz.
Thank you. So on behalf of myself and my co-facilitator, I would like to thank SBI Chair Marianne Carlson for the very warm welcome and the excellent remarks provided. It's really on point, so thank you for that. The Durban Forum is a place where we hear the views of parties and non-party stakeholders, as well as perspectives from capacity building recipients and providers. So it's quite a broad grouping that's at this Durban Forum. The key inputs and interventions made by the speakers and the audience today will be captured in a summary report which will be submitted to the SBI for consideration at its 52nd session. The outcomes of the Durban Forum will also be presented to the PCCB during its next meeting to inform the committee's deliberations. Before we get started, I would like to present you to the netiquette for today's meeting and introduce the platforms that will facilitate our discussions. I had to actually Google netiquette because initially I thought it was an error, but actually it's a real word. So it's the etiquette of online meetings. So please keep your microphone muted and your camera off unless you have been given the floor to speak. So that's the first request. The second is that there are specific agenda slots where the floor will be open for participants and for your interventions. So please use the raise hand function to intervene. And lastly, if you have additional thoughts and comments, there will be a survey at the end of this meeting where you can submit these inputs. And then last but not least, we will be using 2 online tools to facilitate the interactions in this meeting. The first is Padlet and the second is Mentimeter. So coming back to Padlet, this tool will be used to collect your questions for the panelists during the main plenary. The link will be posted on the chat box. So you'll click on the link, but we'll talk you through it later. And then later on during the breakout sessions, we will also use Padlet to collect your inputs for the discussions. The second tool to be used will be Mentimeter, and this is to provide or to facilitate interaction. Our colleague, Victor Mediavilla, will introduce you to it. Over to you, Victor.
Thanks, Shehnaz. To begin, please go to menti.com and enter the following code. This is 5457114. The code is available on your screen. It is advisable also to use your phone or a separate device to connect to this platform so you can use the tool with a minimal disruption to your meeting participation. Now, please answer the first question that I'm going to just share my screen quickly. Here. I hope that you all see the presentation. So the first question, if you go to menti.com and enter the code, is where are you joining us from? And you can just put a pin on the map. Okay. I see many pins already. You from South America, from Japan. I guess that one is Makoto or other of our colleagues. Probably from Costa Rica, from Europe, Africa as well. Okay, so very, very, very diverse. Great. So now let's jump to the second question. That is, what kind of organization do you represent? You have many options here. We want to know which is the diversity of our public today. Okay, mostly from government representatives, also some international organizations. Okay, great. So I see that you are very familiar with Menti. Thanks a lot. All right. So now, Shanaz, over to you. She will just guide you through today's agenda.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. So today's agenda, I'm just going to run you quickly through the structure of today's program, the agenda. We will begin with a special address from Agrippina Jenkins-Royas discussing the experience of Costa Rica in implementing its national decarbonization plan. After that, we'll move into a panel discussion where we will delve deeper into today's topics, and this will be followed by a Q&A session where you'll be given the opportunity to add your questions onto Padlet. After a short break, participants will be invited to join one of 4 breakout groups. Makoto will talk you through that later, and then we will reconvene for feedback on discussions and in closing remarks. Before I move or introduce you to Agrippina Jenkins-Royas, I will briefly show you how to send questions to our panelists through our online question board Padlet. I think many of you do know it, but just so we're all exactly on the same page. First of all, if you go into the chat box, you'll notice there's a link, and it will open the question board for the Durban Forum. So it will open it on your laptop. I'm wondering whether you can all just give me a thumbs up or put your hands up if you're managing to go into it, so that or even just 1 or 2, if you can just give me a thumbs up or your hand so that we know you are seeing it. So I'm looking here. Okay. So people are, thank you, Deepa. Thank you. I'm just worried we get carried away and nobody can access Padlet. Right. So I think that's all good. If there's any issues you're having and you have a burning question you want to enter but you can't get into Padlet, please comment in the text box and then we'll try and help you. So you can add general questions for all the panelists, which will then, when we come to the Q&A, we'll present it to all of them. Or else you can click on each panelist and type under, you'll see there's like a row or a column under them. You then type your question to that specific panelist. And then in order to save time, because, we're going to try and finish on time today. So what we will do is we'll address all the questions at the end of the panel discussion. So I hope that is quite clear. And then without further ado, I'm very pleased and excited to introduce Agrippina Jenkins-Royas, advisor to the Climate Change Office in Costa Rica. Over to you, Agrippina.
Thank you very much, Shanaz. Thank you, Makoto, for having this opportunity, and of course for you colleagues to be here. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Allow me just a second to do so. Okay, so hopefully you will be seeing my presentation right now. If not, I will hear from you in a second. So it's a pleasure, as I mentioned before, to be able to present a little bit of what we do here in Costa Rica, or have been doing in the past 5 to 6 years. What we see in Costa Rica as climate action, it has to do a lot of how we see the development of the country. So for us, decarbonization and resilience goes to transform or help us to transform our development model and to achieve that just and more prosperous future. I mentioned this because we need to understand how is the vision of the country in order to also explain the policies. I will not go into deep with to our climate change policies, but more a little bit on our decarbonization plan and tell you a little bit of what I have been requested to tell you about that has to do with the private sector engagement, and also how do we manage to do a lot of consultations and a lot of workshops to get to the point to have that plan. On that note, also the country has been developing since we signed or being part of the Paris Agreement in 2015. Our ratification was in 2016. We have been basically placing a new legal and institutional framework because, of course, the Paris Agreement requires to do so in order to achieve not only our goals on the NDC, but, of course, now the long-term strategy goals. Also, we usually traditionally see climate action in the country as per mitigation and adaptation, but I want to draw your attention to how we see it. Is about the worst effects of climate change and, of course, how to deal with the inevitable impacts. So on that note, I will refer, as I mentioned, to our three main policies. The first one will be the National Adaptation Policy. This, of course, is guiding the framework for us to act on adaptation. Not only has the vision base, and it's going to be developed until 2030, but it provides us a little bit more of other sectors that usually are not taken into account with mitigation. And why I say usually is because more of the time we base, as not only Costa Rica, but a lot of other countries, on which are the sectors that have more emissions on our countries. So it's important that also the adaptation policies have sectors that are being affected that are not precisely of the most emissions of GHG in our inventory. These are the policy axes. As you can see, we have substantive and instrumental axes. And of course, as I mentioned, this is only a brief review. But of course, all this information is available on our websites. And most of it, of course, is in Spanish. But definitely we can answer your questions after the presentations. So we have the instrumental that has to know how we know exactly what's going on in the country with the effects or the impacts of climate change, to plan ahead, and of course to invest to have a more resilient, not only economy, that is one of our substantive policies, but of course more resilience on our population as well. Of course, on the substantive side, we have the nature-based solutions that we have been developing for many, many years in the country. And of course, to have our services and infrastructure that comes from our public institutions and of course the government to be more resilient. Costa Rica submitted our first NDC in 2015. We made the update on 2020. And I just wanted to highlight it because one of the things that we made was to, since we have already our national decarbonization plan, was to align the NDC to this. But also, it allows us to have a little bit more information since we built the first NDC. And importantly, is that this and the previous NDC, of course, take into account human rights, gender equality, and of course, the just transition. So on our goals on the NDC, we also make the alignment with the 1.5 target. My apologies that it is a little bit in Spanish, but I will definitely let you know what it says. So in 2030, it basically says we will reduce our emission to 9.11 million of CO2 equivalent tons. And if you can see there, our NDC commitment for 2015, now we have not only base target, but also we have the precise target for the development until 2030 of our NDC. Now, if I may go to our national decarbonization plan. The LTS was developed, it started at the end of 2018, and it was presented to our country, but the whole world as well, by our president in 2019. This seeks to decarbonize, of course, all of the sectors of the economy that the country has and get to net zero emissions by 2050. And as is mentioned there, that means that the country will have gradually reduced all its emissions and only a fraction of current emissions will remain, and those will be captured by carbon sinks. One important thing, and it goes here where I think is more of interest on the Durban Forum, has to do with the capacity building. we have been building a lot of capacity that is around, of course, first of all, having science as the middle of the development of our policies. But on that also, we have been doing a lot of work with modeling in order to understand what we have in the country and how we can foresee scenarios of development. That is important because that is also the base of our development, not only on the NDC, but also on new policies that the country is developing. Also, one key effort was to have our Ministry of Planning and Economic Policy to be involved in the process, not only because we need all the ministries to be involved, but because this is the ministry that does the national planning of the country. So it also provides tools to that process. And the country also has developed a way of having the workshops and also how to connect with the private sector of academia and civil society. And of course, all of these efforts, they're always on a continuous improvement to have this and produce this type of policies. So going back to the National Decarbonization Plan, it has different goals and it has sectors involved, as I mentioned before. So as you can see here, we have 10 focus areas. So basically 1, 2, and 3 are the ones that has to do with transport because that is the bigger meter in the country. Then we have the renewable energy on a competitive cost. As you may know, Costa Rica produces more than 98% of its electricity based on renewables. On the area 5, 6, and 7, the 5 has to do with our building and how we're going to transform the infrastructure to be on a low emissions. As well, 6 has to do with the industrial sector and 7 with waste management. The last ones, that are 8, 9, and 10, has to do with everything with agriculture, low emission livestock as mentioned, and of course territorial management with nature-based solutions. Why do I mention the areas? Is because in order to understand the way that we have developed this is also based on what we have of information at the time being of our national GHG inventory. And I want to highlight that because I think one of the precise information that we need is not only the inventory, is to have data and information produced in our countries in order to understand how policies will manage that information in order to act and to achieve our goals. Also, the National Decarbonization Plan has transversal strategies. This is really key because, of course, to decarbonize an economy, we're talking about having a transformation of the development model that we have, has to do with everything else that is involved in the country, of course. So we have summarized it in these 8 strategies. I want to highlight, because I know you might have questions or comments, and as well, thinking about time. So on this, I want to highlight something that I now, on a middle of a pandemic, it has highlighted all over the world, that has to do with digitalization and knowledge-based economy. With that, it also comes to transparency, metrics, and open data strategy. For us, it's really important that all the information that is being collected by the decarbonization plan in this case, or any other policy, has that information available for all the people that lives in the country. And you can have a little bit of what we're trying to produce and what we're doing with our national system for metrics and climate change. That one will allow us to not only keep track on the policies, but also to know when the policies need to have changes in order to achieve the goals. That is really key. Of course, for us, the inclusion and respect for human rights and gender equality is the base of our work. That has to be the base of a lot of the work the country has been made for many, many, many years. And finally, and not least, and I'm just highlighting these strategies, there is no order or highlight on this other than just for the presentation. I will highlight the labor strategies for a just transition. Of course, everything that we're doing on climate change, and we are a very ambitious country, will go and is going through a just transition. We need to understand that all of what we're doing needs to reflect on the most vulnerable, and also to understand the historical made exclusions of groups of people. So we're working closely and we're starting to work with some of the populations in Costa Rica that have been historically excluded. So just a quick reminder, this is our 3 core documents, and definitely I will go back a little bit here just to mention on how the decarbonization plan was made. We, of course, as I mentioned, have the information that we got from our scenarios, from the modeling, but also we have a long process of having consultations with the public and private sectors, and of course, civil society and academia. But it was a really interesting negotiation on how to present the goals in a way that everyone will be on board and will basically agree. And of course, there's sectors that do not agree on the decarbonization plan because it is a challenge, but also because of interest of their own jobs or processes or even companies. And I mentioned this because to say that the whole country agrees on this is not correct, but it's important to understand that it's a consensus. Last year, we made and presented this past week the result for our National Climate Change Survey. We showcase an important question, several, but one that I want to highlight is that the country sees and has the perception that our green recovery needs to be that green, and that on that space, there's a possibility to have very good jobs and a development better for the country. So I highlight it because also it is important to understand the perspective and the opinions of all the people or the people that lives here in the country. I will summarize it there. Thank you very much for your attention, because I will love and like to have a little bit of interaction or questions on this. But of course, if there's more detail, we can go back and I can definitely provide you with that detail. With that, co-facilitators, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Agrippina. That was really interesting. And for me, it's also what's interesting is sitting in South Africa, like how often the issues are so similar. So, yeah. So thank you for that. I'm handing over to Makoto now, who will introduce the panelists, and then we're going into the panel discussion. So over to you, Makoto.
Thank you very much, Shanaz. And so my great thanks to Agrippina for your great, fantastic presentation. Now, we would like to move on to the panel discussion. It is our pleasure to introduce you to our other 4 panelists. First, Dr. Clara Brandi, Head of Research Program at the German Development Institute. Hello, Clara. And then the next one is the Dr. Malé Fofana, representative of Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire at the Global Green Growth Institute. Dr. Malé Fofana, hello. And then the third panelist, Vosita Vijayanayake, Executive Director of Slycan Trust from Sri Lanka. Vosita, welcome. And then Lena Kaczmarski, Team Lead Climate Finance and Mitigation at the Climate Policy Support Program in the GIZ. Welcome. So to guide the questions, discussions, and our panelists will address the following questions I would like to introduce. So what are the major challenges and constraints that countries face to address climate and development goals more coherently? How can capacity building contribute to overcome them? Very interesting question. How can country better identify the capacities needed for better integrating the implementation of climate policy instruments with these sustainable development goals? How can peer learning and international cooperation contribute to identifying the best practices for coherently implementing the Paris Agreement and then 2030 agenda in developing countries? So these are 3 questions. But first of all, we would like to hear from Clara Brandi. She and her team have been in the last years researching the connections between nationally determined contributions, NDCs, and Sustainable Development Goals. The final product of their research was a tool that Clara will now kindly present to us. And after that, we would like Clara to address the first guiding question about the major challenges and constraints. And that countries face to address climate and development goal more coherently. So over to you, Clara, please.
Thank you so much. Let me take a moment to share my slides. Thank you so much for this kind introduction. It's a great honor and huge pleasure to be here today and share our insights. If we want to build capacity for addressing climate and development goals coherently, as is the topic of this meeting today, then we need to first understand, I think, the connections between the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda. And this is where the NDC SDG connection tool can be key. We all know that SDG action can interact with climate and that climate action can interact with the SDGs. But to make good use of these interlinkages, we have to really understand the details of it, and we need to identify the SDGs that the NDCs do address and try to tackle. So to make progress in this regard, we have gone through more than 8,000 individual specific activities in all the NDCs from the perspective of the SDGs. And we've analyzed them through the lens of more than 100 different variables. And what do we find? We find there is a great number of linkages, of connections between the NDCs and the SDGs. And these connections go far beyond SDG 13 on climate action. This, of course, generates potential for synergies. And to make good use of these synergies and to make our insights accessible, we have visualized our insights in an online tool, an interactive online tool, so that these insights are easily accessible, including to all of you. And this is how the results look at the global level. Here you have the big overview of the NDCs and their connections to the 17 SDGs from the global perspective. The size of each of the colorful segments here shows how many NDC activities correspond to the relevant SDGs. So we see NDCs can, for example, substantially contribute to the implementation of SDGs, including SDG 7, SDG 2, SDG 15, or 11. And if you want to look at this in more detail, do look at our website. But we go beyond this. This is how it looks like at the country level. So for each and every country, you can look at the connections between NDCs and SDGs and look at the potentials. Then again, we went beyond the goal level and have also analyzed detailed connections between the 169 targets. And then in the context of SDG 6 on water, this is how it looks like, for example. As we can see here, there are 6 individual targets in the inner circle of SDG 6. And as we can also see, NDCs can mainly contribute to target 6.4 on better water use efficiency. So again, we can use this to identify synergies, but of course also untapped potential. And this is important if we want to build capacity for addressing climate and development coherently. We also have this analysis for different regions and country categories, and as I said, individual countries as well. In addition, we show a couple of additional elements, as you can see here for SDG 6 on water, for example, the type of climate action, in this case mostly focused on adaptation rather than mitigation, the percentage of targets that are quantifiable, in this case around 8%, the top countries by number of climate activities, and the top co-benefits themes with other SDGs. Finally, we identified around 40 different cross-cutting themes on sustainable development. And here we show which ones are relevant for water. If we look at all 40 cross-cutting themes we analyzed for all SDGs, then this is how the network looks like. Here we can see which SDGs are connected to which cross-cutting themes of sustainable development. And we can see the most relevance are across all SDGs are, for example, energy, looking at text size efficiency, resource efficiency, and infrastructure. Analyzing the NDCs from this perspective shows the interlinked and natural character of the SDGs. And it shows that climate activities in NDCs entail synergies that can contribute to multiple SDGs at the same time. So coming to an end, the tool has received quite a lot of interest, and we also look forward to you having a look at it and see whether it's useful for you. But why is it relevant, or why might it be relevant for you? The tool really aims to foster dialogue of how to meaningfully complement the two agendas and to make use of both synergies and co-benefits. We also aim to, with the tool, increase transparency with easy accessibility to all climate activities. And we seek to promote learning and partnerships across countries and different actor types to, in the end, raise the ambition of future NDCs. And all of this, we think, is needed as a basis for building capacity for addressing climate and development goals coherently. We aim to be done with coding the updated and new NDCs by the COP. So please have a look at the current analysis, but also come back later this year for an updated insight into the next round of NDCs. And please do get in touch if you're interested in further details or if you have any questions. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Clara, for your great, very insightful presentation. Synergy and co-benefits. Well, there are the reason why this analysis and consideration are relevant, and we would like to put this into practice. Thank you so much, and we will look forward to your the future analysis result. Now, I would like to hand over to my microphone to Shanaz, please.
Yeah, thank you, Clara, and thank you, Makoto, for handing it back to me. So I just want to remind all participants, this is a very kind reminder to please use the Padlet to submit your questions. I see there are some questions there already. Actually, I just checked now and there were 2, so that's good. Our next phase of this is where we'll ask the rest of the panelists to please address the 3 guiding questions. Now, each of the panelists has 5 minutes to do so. There's 3 questions here. You can talk to whichever one you feel most comfortable with. And the order of panelists will be Male Fofana first, Rosita Vienayeka second, and then Lena Kaczmarski third, and then lastly Agrippina Jenkins. And I think that's only because you had the floor already. So over to you, Male, and if you maybe just want to tell us which of the 3, whether you're talking to all 3, and then at 5 minutes, I will try and let you know it's 5 minutes. And I'll do that, so I'm going to put my camera off. I'll do that by switching my camera back on so that you know the 5 minutes are over. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Sinas. I will make sure that I will stick to those 5 minutes. And thank you for the kind introduction. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, panelists and members, as well as all the participants. I would like also to take the opportunity to thank to the UNFCCC Secretary for leading this Durban Forum on capacity building. I would like to tap on the different points and then share, as well as our experience as a Global Green Growth Institute regarding the capacity building issues and challenges. And I divided it into 3 parts I would like to share with all the participants. One of the main challenges is linked to the government public part, right? And the reason why I raise that because it's really important when you're building a capacity to making sure that those who will receive that capacity building have the requirement to really absorb, also apply what is needed. And one of the things I call it the first challenge is the ownership or the low leadership at the institutional level. One of the major points that we need to consider and important is the willingness and the commitment to learn and combine and do and apply from the public sector perspective, right? And in the public sector, these requirements mean that that vision or the orientation should come from strong leadership from the government side. Otherwise, there will be no coherence and no buy-in as well, and no consensus, because each government body or ministries will play the role working in silo because they have their own strategy or they have their own agenda they would like to follow, and they're not seeing the link between what they're doing with SDG as well as the NDC as well. So it's good just trying first to see how we can do that, and also the way to do it so is having some standalone or consolidated documents like the National Flagship Program or National Green Growth Strategy that will be collectively developed by the country and led by the top decision maker, so we can have a overall ownership on that. And the best way to start really building that, let's say, orientation is to start also building the capacity, not only the technician, but also the higher decision maker in parliament. What is SDG? What is the NDC as well? What are the different links? So they can put it also on the agenda and play that role on that. The second challenge, I'm calling that challenge is matching the inappropriate skills and institution and staff, right? Because just understand the public culture carrier rules and policy to build a capacity building program, not a project, is really, really important, because the staff turnover within the public sector, retention for knowledge is really high in the sense, right? When you start an NDC 1 year, and the next 5 years you have different people that you will deal with underwriting on NDC and a different capacity as well. So it's mean you will start from zero with that new team that will be selected by the government. And the selection process will know on the trainee sometimes are not rational. And for example, that will not helping you to build really strong, solid, consistent foundation for SDG or NDC in a different ministry. Because when you go to some countries, you have a focal point for NDC in one ministry, and you have a focal point for SDG in another ministry. And there is no link or current discussion on what are the different things they can do together. And we strongly know, and Clara mentioned that, for example, when you go to SDG, that's 82% of all NDC include urbanization related to climate activities. You have also NDC on climate action explicitly referred to gender issues, only few doing it. And SDG 2.0 hunger have really the second highest total related to climate activities across the NDC. Most of the NDC people, when you look at the SDG, they say the only, let's say, goals that link to the climate change is the SDG 13, which is, I think, a big mistake, because climate change go across the different SDGs. We're coming to the challenge 3, which is the virtual era. I call it adaptation during this COVID-19 pandemic, combined with ICT issues and internet, connection bandwidth, and also energy access. For most of the LDC country, when it's come to do now for the virtual training session, which is coming more and more, let's say, the rules, they have some issues on that. And I stopped saying that the COVID-19 situation is really a good opportunity to build a green recovery, to support those countries to make that integration between SDG and also NDC as well, that have some kind of common document that will help the government or the country to rebuild the economy itself. That's for the government part. From the technical part, I would say there's one challenge that linked to starting last, right? Most of our institutional organizations start supporting country when it's come 8 months before the submission of a document, right? Or starting 4 months supporting them. And for me and for us, it's not really relevant to start support a country that time. It's not about the final document, but the process to build and raise the capacity of the local expert to lead such initiative and create more fundamental and solid coherence between that. So as a GGI, what we did in certain countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina, we support the NDC mainstreaming, support as well as the development of LTLS with the consolidated document to support the country to make that element. And the other part also is the NDC gender mainstreaming, helping also the country to integrate those elements. So we deliver more than 200 capacity building exercise in beneficiary for 40,000 beneficiaries, and we are embedded with the government that will give us the chance to know exactly what are the issues from the government and from our perspective on our green growth model, supporting the government to do so. So I will stop there. I know Shaz is there, so I know, so we will happen to answer more and go more in details on our model that we're supporting the government. Thank you so much.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Male, and thank you for responding when I put my camera on. The next respondent is Rosita. Are you here?
Yes, can you hear me?
Brilliant. Okay, welcome. And so over to you, and then I'll do the same. I'll put my camera off and put it on when it's 5 minutes. Yeah, so over to you.
Right, thank you very much. Just to indicate that I'll be speaking in my organizational capacity here, and I will address all three questions and hopefully within the time. To speak on the major challenges and constraints that the countries are facing to address climate and development goals. I believe the understanding of awareness on levels of interlinking the two processes is something that we need to address, and also coordination among the two thematic areas, I think. So the previous speaker spoke on this as well, on how different entities working on climate change as well as sustainable development could coordinate these actions without working in silos, and how work could potentially not be duplicated, and coordination happening in a manner that is frequent, so everyone is updated on what's happening. And then policies and plans, which we need to further integrate, as well as effective stakeholder engagement, which would lead to evidence-based planning to increase climate ambition as well as achieve sustainable development. This would relate to data needs, data management systems, and how both processes could benefit from each other. For example, having one data portal for both processes so that we don't duplicate the actions. And then also this could apply to having monitoring and evaluation that could feed into a larger process than just looking at how climate action happens and how sustainable development goals are achieved. Looking at identifying capacity needs and better integrating the implementation of climate policy instruments. There would be a need to conduct baseline analysis and stock takes, which would provide an overview of the status of capacities existing to integrate the two processes. For example, a country could identify, based on the SDGs potentially, what would be the capacity needs, and then look into how the NDCs potentially could be looking at the technical aspects, and it could be the other way around also. So looking at what we need to provide to better understand the existing capacities to be implemented in a more efficient and enhanced manner, and also what key stakeholders could offer. So having an idea of who the key stakeholders are, and then who works on what, and what capacities they hold. I'm not necessarily talking only about the government, but also research institutes, civil society organizations, multilateral entities working in countries, and what they can offer, so that there is a pool of capacity and technical support that can be available for countries to build on when we are working on sustainable development as well as climate change. So a mapping would be useful, identifying entry points that we can build on, and integrating the two processes, and then also prioritizing a country's development needs and seeing how this connects with addressing climate risks, the vulnerable sectors, and how we can have the structures building on one on the other. And again, we come back to monitoring and evaluation, how we can integrate this as well as policy processes that would connect to this. In terms of peer learning and international cooperation, so there could be South-South cooperation as well as South and North cooperation. So an example would be multi-active partnerships or networks that could contribute to peer learning. This could be multi-stakeholder ones, as well as across government partnerships as well. Then potentially capacity building grants that could be regional as well. And then collective actions that could be cross-country, cross-regional, identifying common capacities. I'm very sorry about the background music. The bread van is in the area. And then also knowledge management, and how the knowledge management could benefit across countries as well as across stakeholders, because there's a lot of capacity that's out there, and then we could exchange this through a portal or a process that could benefit everyone. And I think PCCB would play a key role in this as well. Just to refer to couple of examples. For example, the NAP country profiles that are being developed by multiple actors, NAP technical working group. That could be an example. For example, Slack and Trust does work in Africa with actors and government entities also as well, while we're placed in Slack and being in Sri Lanka. Then the Global Youth Forum, the youth forums that are happening, how youth could contribute to these processes, capacity being built, and mentorships, as well as learning from them as well, from the evidence-based actions that they do. So these are a few things I wanted to highlight. I'll be happy to share more information with you as needed, or if someone finds this interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Where are you based, Vasita?
I'm calling from Colombo, Sri Lanka at the moment.
Okay. No, I was just interested because that sound here for us in Cape Town in South Africa is normally an ice cream truck. So when you said it was the bread, I thought, okay, that's so interesting. Thank you for that. I'm sure, and I'm just going to go to Padlet quickly before I hand over to Lena. So I see there are questions coming up, and that is, I'm really appreciative about that. So just to remind you, please go ahead and ask as many questions as you want to, and then we'll come back to them later. So Lena, over to you, and the same 5 minutes, I'll put my camera on and wave at you. Yes, okay, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shinas, and thank you so much to the Secretariat and everyone involved to make this session possible virtually, and I hope everybody is fine at home. I'm based in Bonn and working for GIZ. I'm representing GIZ. We are a federal enterprise providing international cooperation services for sustainable development, and we work in more than 120 countries, and our main commissioning parties are the German BMZ, that you might know, Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the German BMU, the Ministry for Environment. Just to mention a couple of insights on GIZ so that you know who we are. So as GIZ, our core competence, our core business is capacity development, capacity building. So I'm very glad that we are invited today, and I would like to share some comments on question 3, but I would also like to have and share some short comments on the first and second question. And of course, the third one gives us almost 2 minutes or 3 minutes for promotion of our work, and I hope that you have some questions. And I would like to also advertise group 3 that I will moderate later, and we can dig deeper on some of our examples and our work in our partner countries. So on question 1, I would like to share 3 reflections that my panel colleagues have already mentioned as well, and I think that are very much seen in many of our partner countries. The first constraint is maybe coherence. So we see that translating international agendas, be it SDG agenda or the climate change agenda, is very difficult to translate from the international to the national and subnational level. So we see in our partner countries that the implementation oftentimes goes in pillars, in silos, and there's not a lot of cooperation, coordination between different ministries and maybe different levels. So we are actually seeing that there's an inadequate implementation in terms of vertical and horizontal integration of these topics. So we address this as GIZ, and I would like to post some links during my 5 minutes so that you can maybe also later on check some videos and some further information. So, and we see that building capacities at all levels is necessary to improve coherence. And we also look at specific realities of different stakeholders, and I'll come back to that in the second question. So at the same time, when we zoom into climate change actions, we also see that adaptation and mitigation measures have been pursued separately for years. So even these are not interlinked and not even maybe linked to the priorities of the national development agenda. So that is maybe the first constraint. The second one is planning and data, and we've heard this before today. Oftentimes planning processes are not well developed, or maybe stakeholders are missing. So we see that that can also be a constraint on national level. And then at the same time, also data monitoring systems and technical expertise, again, at various levels of government officials, but also other actors that need to be included, such as academia, for example. A third constraint that we've been coming across in our work is finance and budgets. So from the climate action point of view, in the implementation of NDCs and national adaptation plans, we see that it is often hindered by domestic budget constraints and countries' limited access to international climate finance. So long-term climate action is not so much a budget priority, and we see that the pandemic situation has reinforced this. And of course, we have to take a look also at how green can the recovery be, because money can only be spent once, right? So we see that often there's on the national level inadequate state regulations, lack of capacities to acquire national funding, lack of capacities to write proposals. So we also as GIZ try to help and support the development of good proposals, so that access to funding also internationally can be strengthened, but also national financing mechanisms can be adapted. So I would like to briefly spend 2 minutes on the second question, because I see that we've been talking a lot about government officials and national and subnational level that are important, but I also think that sometimes academia is overlooked. So we think that strong economic institutions are the foundation for understanding, planning, implementing effective climate action and linking it with sustainable development. So we as GIZ also try to focus more on these kind of actors, also looking at private sector actors, financial sector actors, and civil society organizations next to government officials. And I think in Costa Rica, we've heard the example, all these groups need to be included, and also climate action and their terminology needs to be translated so that all stakeholders can be included. And I would like to spend the rest of my time, which is not so much. Oh, that's too fast. I would invite you to the breakout group so we can discuss this further. If you give me 1 second, I think peer learning and international cooperation is really our great and our business as GIZ. So we have a lot of examples, and I would like to link you to the PCCB submission of GIZ, where you can find a lot of examples of our work and the countries that we've supported, and the international networks and peer-to-peer learning processes that GIZ supports globally. And so I would post the link as well so that you can take a look at this. So I'm jumping questions 3, which would have been the most important one, Tina. It's so short, 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, one doesn't realize how quickly 5 minutes go when you're so passionate. So thank you, Lena. Thank you. Agrippina, over to you again. I'm not fine. Okay, there. I see you now. So the same 5 minutes, and then I will put my camera on and wave at you. So over to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address again our colleagues. I have been checking a little bit of the questions. I see there are too many. Thank you for that, but I will try to make my best effort to address them. On this, there's something that I would like definitely to tell you about that has to do with after we make the plan, and of course with the scenarios and the modules.
Is it just me, or can nobody else hear Agrippina?
No, I think we lost her. Let's see if we can reconnect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm just looking to the tech support. So it looks like I think we've lost her completely.
Okay.
That's what it looks like has happened, Makota.
Okay.
So I think let's give people an opportunity to keep adding into the questions. I'm going to Padlet now to have a look. And okay, this is quite exciting. There are more. So I see there's questions for each of our panelists besides Lena. So I'd like to encourage you to ask Lena questions. And then I think I just want to double check if Agrippina is back or not. You're back. Welcome. Okay. You can start over again. Yes. Okay. Go, Agrippina.
Thank you. My apologies. Electricity just went off and on here, so internet didn't come back as quickly as the light. So my apologies for that. So I was mentioning that one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that after we did the modeling with, of course, taking into account the economy of the country, we then have a very specific study that was also provided, and of course all of these processes also helped out by the international cooperation in the case, of course, of Costa Rica. But on this of the analysis, we have a cost-benefit analysis that provide us with information on how much, of course, is the cost of the National Decarbonization Plan, but also about the benefits. And we have a big number about those benefits. So for Costa Rica, if we implement fully the long-term strategy, the decarbonization plan, it will give us a total a net benefit of $41,000 million for the country. I know that sounds like it is a big amount, but it's interesting on how you can get data that you already have on the country. And of course, doing all the exercise that has to do with having this type of analysis. And not only get that information, but to know that this is the correct pathway for the development of the country. We're also developing, and we have just first results. This is still not published. That has to do with compare how the country or the effect that the pandemic had in the country and how a business as usual of recovery will have results and how a greener and through a recovery based on the long-term strategy will have the data. The first results that we have is that we have more positive results for employment for the country and the added value when you go through the long-term strategy. So trying to go back to the questions on engagement from the ministries. Also, of course, Costa Rica has a long story of going through environment for its development. So it's not a new thing for our authorities, but as well, this was a big mandate from our president. Therefore, you have the ministers sitting down in our base solutions on the cabinet, also viewing not only their sector, but the whole plan and to take into account the actions. And as I mentioned before, that it is very important to have our Ministry of Planning and Economic Policy because they do our National Development Plan. If you see the National Development Plan of Costa Rica right now, it has, again, goals on decarbonization. And this was before the LTS. So we, of course, align the LTS with our National Development Plan as well. And I'm trying to go back to the questions on the barriers. We have encountered several barriers on appropriation sometimes for the sectors. So we still have a very good communication with the sectors. And of course, as I mentioned before, this is a continuous improvement. We're not trying to solve all the issues at once, but we try to have this communication with the sectors. And again, to view forward on how these policies will maintain with the change of governments, one key and main issue has to do with the involvement of the private sector. And we have, of course, sector that is moving forward, not only because this is related, or what they do is related to the long-term strategy, but also because it makes sense for their enterprise, for the business, and of course on the sectors. It has to do on how we can not only mitigate, but adapt to the effects of climate change. This is very important, for example, for the agricultural sector. And of course, anything that has to do with infrastructure. If you view the transport sector, we do infrastructure, but if we don't prepare and we don't have that planning, then we will need to build back that infrastructure, which for our countries is not easy, of course, at any time to make those type of investments. So we're trying to do not only the long-term strategy or in line with the INDC and the national adaptation policy. It has to do with what we already are making on the country. So we have our local governments on the process with our Plan E, that is Plan for Adaptation, that goes to the local governments and try to assist them on how to place adaptation as a key effort or a key transversal, basically, area on their already planning that they already do. That is really important. We're not having or providing new documents for them. What they're doing is how we can incorporate adaptation to our planning. I think it's very important and also key on the stakeholders. And I'm trying to go back fast because I know our co-facilitators will be letting me know at the time that it's gone. Let me just double check. Any other questions that might be left? Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. Are you, when you say, so there's quite a few questions for you on the Padlet. So I think, so we're moving into our Q&A session now. And if you look at the Padlet, there's questions across for everybody. So I'll start off with you, Agrippina, because we've got you here. There seems to be quite a few for you. So I'm just going to read it for you. So the one is, it's particularly with the National Decarbonization Plan that you spoke about. How do you ensure buy-in from all stakeholders and ministries? Right. How it was assured that all these policies were made based on scientific evidence, and how was the process? To what extent will this program affect economic growth? How to convince the parties that this program is in line with the economic growth target? Sometimes when making good plans and policies, you have very good ideas or proposals, but when executing, you may encounter barriers or difficulties. What barriers have you been able to identify so far in your plans? And what proposals have they devised to deal with them? And then the last one, taking into account the changes of government that are taking place, how have you been able to ensure that the plans presented are carried out or continued? So I think there's quite a range there. It's quite, it's quite insightful, most of them. So over to you, Agrippina.
Thank you very much, Ines. Yes, as I was mentioning, the engagement with our national authorities was really important to move forward. But also, the long-term strategy is not based or something that just we made one day. Of course, this is based, for example, on previous efforts, on our national strategy for climate change, on our NAMAs that are already in place, and of course with different policies that different sectors already have. So this was not the first policy that we have related to climate change. The big difference, of course, is that it's an LTS, which for countries like ours, it takes an amount of effort to plan not only for the time of the administration, but also on the long term. So one of the key issues was not only to have that context, but also to sit down with the ministers, with the authorities, with the technical people, of course, because it's the technical persons that will provide not only the information, but also that type of guidance, and then, of course, that political guidance. So that was key, first of all, to have that context, to sit down with the sectors, and of course, with the different institutions, because it's not only the ministries here, so it's also our national institutions. For example, the utilities in Costa Rica, the big part of the utilities are from the government, from the state. So we need to sit down and have those conversations with them as well. So with that, it was a whole process not only of bilateral meetings and workshops. It was a process that we also can provide the inputs that the modeling that we were doing that is related to, for example, our central bank here in Costa Rica, provide not only the input, but of course answering the questions from those sectors. That will be my first reaction to that. Just I wanted to highlight on the guiding questions on the, if I may do so, on the international cooperation. I will say to have the facility of several of the international cooperation, GIZ, the UNDP, the World Bank, and the IDB, that provide us with a lot of the efforts that we needed in the country, not only to have the access to information, but also to construct with us the process. So it's key for us to have the international cooperation, understand that the country has a vision and it has already the policies in place, and they have done so. So I wanted to highlight that. I think with the previous intervention, I covered some of the questions, but one that I think is very, very relevant has to do with science. We have a continuous improvement on the country with our climate change scenarios that we're trying to make every time better and better. And of course, I have mentioned this several times, that has to do with modeling. This type of modeling was able to be developed here because we have a lot of technical persons that are also dedicated to view the data and to provide the data and promote the data through, of course, also scientific methods and, of course, investigation to do so. So that was important. And I know because of time, I would like to provide more input, so we can definitely have a little bit more information be provided so the participants, colleagues can check that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agrippina. So I would like to take up questions for Clara. So in the Padlet, well, you can find like 3 questions. So I will read it through for you. So the first question is NDC's SDGs synergy. So do you see NDCs assisting in achieving both sustainable development goals, and how do we ensure they're complementary and not competitive? So I think it's a very important question. And the second one is involving SDGs to national policies regarding climate change will increase their impact and assure the 2030 goals to not to leave anyone behind. Okay. And the third one is I think you're happy to introduce how this is going to happen, but how can this tool be useful to focus on capacity building? So I would like to invite Clara.
Thank you so much, and I'll try to be quick to leave time for the other 3 other panelists. Thank you so much for these highly interesting questions, and please please get in touch if you want more information. So I think going backwards, I think that the NDC SDG connections tool can be a basis to focus on capacity building. It can really undermine the need for and the essential importance of capacity building. For example, it can show how important it is to focus on capacity building because capacity building can promote NDC implementation, and our tool shows how many co-benefits NDC implementation can generate also for sustainable development. So this can provide incentives to really invest in capacity building. I think this is a key point. It can also be a basis to focus on capacity building to show how important, and this came up before, how important it is to go beyond silos, both horizontally and also vertically, and to really use capacity building to increase cooperation and coordination across ministries and across the different levels of governance. So to try to really promote integrated governance approaches. I think moving to the second question involving this question of leaving one behind, I think, taken into account SDGs when focusing on NDC implementation does not necessarily assure that nobody is left behind, but it can really underline the importance of this goal and can help to prioritize this going forward. Moving on to the first question very, very briefly, this is of course a key question, and I'm not saying that there are no trade-offs between the different SDG goals or between NDCs and SDGs, but I think our analysis shows that if you focus on NDC implementation and if you direct capacity building towards NDC implementation, then you automatically contribute to SDG implementation, because there are so many different sustainable development relevant and SDG relevant issues that are part of the NDCs, that in the end there's a lot of scope for complementary or in the end synergetic effects that you can generate. So they don't necessarily have to be in competition, but to the contrary, there's a lot of potential for co-benefits. And at the same time, of course, trade-offs have to be identified and then have to be managed and taken into account. So far from my side, and thanks very much for this great exchange.
Thank you, Clara. So the next questions, and we're actually going into a break in 10 minutes. I think what we're going to do, we'll start with Vasita. I'm going to ask you one of your questions. Then we go to Mali and then Leona. And then we come back to Vasita to one of the other questions. So Vasita, for me, the question that was particularly, and it clicked for me because I think you can talk to examples, is how was peer learning implemented in the NAP work you referred to? And I think here, if you can get into the nitty-gritty of how it practically happened. So over to you, Vasita.
Thank you. Speaking about how peer learning went into this, we worked as a technical partner in the process, and there was always a national country partner and the larger network that was working on developing the country profiles. And most of the work, the consultations was with the country-driven aspect and also with the stakeholders in the country, which included government sector, youth, civil society organizations, academia. So there was a lot of interaction and engagement of different stakeholders at country level, where we also provided technical support and put all the things that came together into the profile. And it went back to peer reviewing from the country experts, so that the document was peer reviewed from the country level before we could publish it with the Southern Voices Network that we were working with. So there were specific instances where questions came because the South-South partnership, though it's South-South, when an external entity works, there are questions from different actors whether this is actually the ground level reality that's in a profile. So it helped us to understand what the ground level reality is, what evidence-based actions could be implemented, and also how SDGs, NDCs, and NAP processes could all work together. Or NAP could be linking with these two processes of implementation of NDCs and SDGs, because we looked into where the country multi-actors identified the key economic priorities, the key actors who could do actions, and also then it went through different levels of peer review where the ownership was at the country level. So this is what I could give as an example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vasita, for your great and solid response. Now, we would like to turn to Mele. You have 3 different questions, but meanwhile, I would like to pick up one to start. Perhaps for the second question, linking for NDCs, SDGs, and finance through capacity building. So how do you think it's good to how should we link achieving the achievement of the NDCs, SDGs, and finance required perhaps through the capacity building support and cooperation?
Thank you so much for the question. Really important, I think, mostly for most of the countries that are seeking more money in terms of development of implementation of the NDC. Our approach as a GIA is when we're supporting those countries to doing the NDC or climate action mainstreaming, we of course we're doing the capacity building on gender mainstreaming, what is important of the gender, also key other element. We're also doing the capacity building on proposal writing, having also helping them to really to know how they can pick up ideas to really a good proposal in a good project, and integrating those key elements that link to the climate change. I will give an example. For example, the work that we're currently doing in Côte d'Ivoire, linking as well in Burkina Faso. Currently in Côte d'Ivoire, what we're doing is that we are supporting the Ministry of Finance to really integrate green growth in what they call the priority investment plan, which is linked to the NDC and SDG as well, because that's a flagship program of the country. Our work is really starting first on helping the investment direction to really have indicators that will help them to define what is a green project and what project really will integrate SDG and NDC well, and having a good selection process to end up having good projects that respond to those requirements. Once we help them, they have the tools and the necessary skills to really identify a green project and not. Now we're also moving to the different sectoral minister, to the different, focal point, to now to train them on the way they can build a project that integrate all the paradigms that are necessary to make that shift from a classic project to a green project, right? So making those links that will help the government to have a strong pipeline when they will presenting to all the donors or green window, they are ensured that the alignment is already made to key documents like NDC as well as SDG as well. So that works very well. And we did a similar work as well in Burkina Faso, supporting the government on the mainstreaming on climate growth or climate element to the new flagship program. And the ways also we're doing it. And I think something that is really important when you're doing that capacity building, three different ideas, NDC, SDG, gender, or finance, to trying to build a core within the ministry and trying to keep using the same core, right, and the same capacity building, right? For example, you have a gender focal point, you have the NDC focal point in the same ministry or SDG. When you have to do a gender training to the gender focal point, trying also to integrate the SDG focal point or the NDC focal point on that training. And also same thing when you do NDC. And I think that the approach that we did in Burkina Faso works well. When we finish the gender mainstreaming action plan with the gender expert, we do the training with the NDC focal point and the SDG. And also we require all other international organizations, when they have to do something similar or a project, to just work with the same group of people. And that helps us to really build a good foundation under the NDC partnership program we had in Burkina Faso as well as in Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mali. Now, Lena, I'm going to ask you one question, and then we won't be able to do another round. But your question, what do you think were the most important lessons you learned in the work you conducted in overcoming challenges? And then after this, we'll be going to a break. So over to you, Lena.
Thank you so much, Shenas. And I would like to answer this by also covering the first question, because our learning is that you have to involve all stakeholders. And I'm talking about non-state and state actors. So I think this solution, there's not one solution that fits all, but one solution that's very interesting is the whole of society approach. And we've, for example, supported this participatory process, very comprehensive process in Peru with a couple of different projects. And it was a multi-level and non-state stakeholder approach. It took some time, you have to be patient, but it was called Let's Talk About NDCs. And then you can actually go into depth on the regional, on the local level, in different sectors. And you need some time to have these workshops during this pandemic. That's much more difficult to do it virtually. But once this process started, for example, in Peru, it took, I think, longer than a year. And I don't know if Peruvian participants are here. It was a very interesting process, and all stakeholders were participating, and it created a lot of ownership. So I think that is a very interesting learning that we as development cooperation service provider and capacity building service provider have seen, and would also like to apply in an adapted manner, of course, in other countries, and support the country stakeholders during these kind of participatory processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. So thank you to first of all, the participants and the presenters for your really enthusiastic participation, and then also to everybody that's listening in and engaging. Yeah, Makoto and I thank you. And we're going into a short, I think it's 5 minutes, into a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, we will be going into the breakout rooms, but Makoto will talk you through that when you come back after 5 minutes. So see you all in 5 minutes.
Daniel, you can start your breakout session here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Max. I'll give it another few seconds because I see that we are still over 40 people in this room. So I imagine some people are still shifting out and going to other groups. Otherwise, it means that we really nailed the subject and we managed to attract a lot of attention and the huge majority of the group. But let's give it a few seconds so that we can start with our group. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Nice that you're here. We're seeing here a comment, Marcia Tinto cannot navigate to group 3. So let's just probably make sure. I wonder if we have Julian online or someone who can just make sure that people are where they want to be. They're not held here against their will. So Alejandro is instructing people to go back to the schedule page if you would like to change group. And Victor has now posted that link, and then you just have to refresh the page. So I think that's working out for everyone. We're seeing now we're down to 33. That probably feels more like probably the size that the group will have. And while people are still making their final movements, let's just get started with those of us who are part of this group. And we have maybe about 45 minutes because we will have a few minutes at the end to break before we move on back to the plenary to discuss this point that Makoto presented, which is the idea or the challenges, the opportunities behind building capacities to assess co-benefits and impacts of climate action and policy. So when we're moving towards, or when, from our different perspectives, we're making efforts to advance sustainable development goals, I say SDGs, capital letters, but also lower cap letters, all these adaptation, mitigation, climate development progress that we, from our different perspectives, are trying to pursue. How can capacity building contribute to attaining, to making these efforts more efficient, more effective, to making both projects but also policies more meaningful, right? That's the discussion we're going to have here. And what we have done is to split it into 4 questions. So what I'd love to do is to spend about 10 minutes in each so that we time ourselves properly. We don't spend too much in one and we forget addressing the last one and so on. So I will ask our rapporteur for this session, which is Max, to first, just say hi, introduce themselves. I won't go for a round of introductions because I think we are too many and that will take up too much time. But just Max, if you could then say hi. And what I will ask you also, because you'll be taking notes, is also to give us a heads up 10 minutes after we start each question discussion so that we move on to the next. And so Max, if you can just...
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel. My name is Max. I'm from the Secretariat, so I will be supporting this session by taking notes and keeping track of the time, as you mentioned. Also just to point out that we have a Padlet set up, so if you want to pose any questions related to the discussion, also feel free to use the link I just shared in the chat. And with that, I will give it back to Danielle to start this discussion.
Thanks, Max. And I would like to ask everyone to log into or click. You don't have to log into, just click onto the Padlet. It has a very nice picture there. You might see it. So if you click into that, you will access the Padlet. And for each of the 4 points, so I want to now for us to focus on the first one. And before we start the conversation, like voice conversation, I'd love to ask each of everyone to just spend about a couple of minutes just in the first column, right? The column that asks the question, what gaps in knowledge and learning are blocking progress on the SDGs? And just start putting down there your comments. You just click on the plus sign under that label, and then you can type your answer, your comment, your even question. So let's spend the next couple of minutes by starting to populate that space. Think about what gaps in knowledge and learning are blocking progress on the SDGs. And here we're trying to be very concrete, right? Let's try to make this conversation really concrete. I think at the panel level, we heard a lot of concrete, but also kind of bigger questions and bigger framings. So let's try to be quite concrete. What are the gaps? What is blocking progress on the SDGs, and how, and particularly when we're talking about knowledge and learning. So we're not talking here about technical fixes. We're talking about when it comes to knowledge and learning, what is blocking progress. I will be silent right now for a couple of minutes and let you start populating that. Feel free, just, it doesn't have to be completely well thought. Just like put down in words what you are thinking about, what you are questioning yourself about. I'll be quiet for a couple of minutes. Over to you to start populating this. Only the first column. Thanks. So I'll just mention, thank you, Vishal, for putting the information there. I've just copy-pasted it into the Padlet. So and that's totally fine. For others, if you go into the Padlet directly, Victor's link just a little bit above, you can directly into the Padlet copy or paste your comments. I haven't seen many, but I think we are a good group here of 20 somethings. So please do feel free to start putting there just your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, your concerns. We have another minute. Okay, while you still have your thoughts going, and please do continue to populate that. I'd like to start a discussion, and from my point of view, I think there's often big differences in terms of understandings, but also approaches to what a solution may be, and what kind of knowledge should be part of that solution. Sometimes we're working, for example, right now in the Pacific Islands, developing a national adaptation plan or supporting the development of an app. And we're finding that for some areas there is a strong capacity, but for others that are quite important around gender, for example, there are big gaps. So how do you make sure that gender, in this case, is an important integral element of an app, and that knowledge doesn't just come from outside, informed and then leaves. That knowledge is part of the whole adaptation process in this particular case. So over to you, over to anyone. Maybe raise your hand if you can find that. It's on the top when you see that little person there with a hand. If you click on that, there's a hand, and then I will see that your hand is up, and I can give you the floor. But if that doesn't work for you, just jump in, unmute yourself, and come in with your thoughts. What gaps in knowledge and learning are blocking progress on sustainable development? Marcena, I think you are...
Yes, I only came now. Sorry. Hello, Daniel. I thought it was going to be a longer break than actually it was. So sorry for being late.
No problem at all. Right. Maybe could I, Vishal, if you would like, because you're the one who's been putting some ideas here, would you like to share some of the points? You're talking about lack of exact mechanism of what constitutes climate change, conflict of immediate human survival needs, and long-term goals. Would you like to expand a little bit on your points, Vishal?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to say there is so much of information floating around. And what is our source of information? It is either Wikipedia or YouTube or Facebook and maybe UNFCCC or United Nations portals. These are our sources of information. And when you go on these portals, especially YouTube, you see some people are saying that climate change is not an emergency as we feel, and some say it is an emergency. A lot of people talk about historical global warming having taken place. So is this global warming an immediate crisis or not? How much of a crisis it actually is, how much it is not. But people who are experiencing actual floods, actual hurricanes, cyclones, they are the ones who are actually at the edge of climate change problems. And they are the ones who feel that climate change is actually a real thing. In fact, you would be aware that in the United States, especially in southern part, the corn crop has moved further north because of increase in temperature. So the farmers there are directly feeling the change of climate change there. If there is knowledge, it is too technical in nature and it is not very understandable by a common person. And also, a lot of this knowledge is not available at the grassroots level. The people who will actually make a difference. Sometimes we feel that policy is what will bring about a change. But actually, my opinion is that climate change is an ethical value. And ethical values cannot be driven top down. Ethical values have to be driven bottom up. That means there has to be a grassroots movement. And what is a grassroots movement? Does it mean a revolution? Does it mean everybody has to join together and get into the streets and say that we want change? No. Everybody has to change at their own level to the best that they can do. Of course, policy will support us and policy will help us implement what we truly feel is helping in reducing greenhouse gases or whatever is our understanding of knowledge. Also, I feel that what is knowledge today becomes obsolete tomorrow. I'm sure we'll get many more insights with the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning subsequently that we will course correct ourselves as to what exactly we need in order to achieve climate change. Just one final point I'll make, and it's a point of ethics and business and climate finance. When we say that, we should move over to solar or we should move over to wind energy, tidal energy, or agroecology or agroforestry or any kind of technology that we want to implement or even crop residue burning, the issue is, are we seeing the complete cycle cost? the cost of manufacturing the solar panel versus the carbon return it is giving. Generally, when we adopt technologies, we are seeing financial returns. We are seeing return on finance. Oh, I'm getting my finance returns in 10 years. But that's not how we have to see it. We have to see it. Am I getting carbon returns in next 30 years, in next 40 years? If I have used 100 tons of carbon to produce this windmill, in next 30 years, will I save 100 tons of carbon? Yeah, that's all I had in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vishal. Appreciate your insight. And by the way, for you and for everyone, could you also mention just the organization you are associated with?
Yeah, I'm associated with Citizens Climate Education, Citizens Climate International.
Great. Thanks, Vishal. Great. So, I mean, that's really a lot of information that you've shared, a lot of insights, a lot of, really important positions. It would be great if someone would like to respond, either respond to Vishal or just add new points. And I believe there's a hand up. Let me find it here. Marcia. Marcia, over to you. And please start by introducing yourself and your organization. Thanks.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I represent the Environmental Management Authority, and I'm part of the Trinidad and Tobago delegation. Well, first of all, living in SIDS, we are definitely exposed to many of the impacts of climate change. One of the things we have done, and of course we're getting into policy now, because as you know, most countries have policies for everything. But we need to have these policies living documents, not documents that are on a shelf or that you can access electronically on a website. And what we have done, we have developed our national environmental policy, and we have been trying to get each thing that we do, even in our strategic development work, to align everything that we do with the SDGs. So that is, for one thing, that's answering the first question more or less, so giving some comment or contribution to it, so that there'll be no gaps. Now, of course, it's the process, and it continues. It doesn't happen overnight. So we constantly have to let people understand, even our own colleagues, that there is some impact on everything they do, and there is a connection to the SDGs. Another thing I'd like to raise, and following on Vishal's comment, is the NGO or civil society, grassroots. Well, we don't like to call them grassroots, but it's civil society or community-based and NGO, environmental NGOs. We try to incorporate them into all the decision makings, all the discussions that we have. So once we develop something, there is input from them. And even if we develop, we also send to them, because we have an umbrella body called the Council of Presidents for the Environment. So they are very involved in all the decision making. But it's really to get the SDGs to let people see that everything that you do, I mean, all of us, whether it be in our work life or otherwise, that there's an SDG component or components involved in everything. So I think it's closing in that gap. It's not an academic thing or a policy or document. It's about lifestyle. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much, Marcia. That's really, really helpful and insightful. And before going to Marcena, I did want to ask you something more, Marcia. From your particular case, representing a country, in this case Trinidad and Tobago, is there a particular gap in knowledge, that you feel, or in the learning process that you feel there's room for improvement? I gave the example in SIDS in the Pacific, where, for example, there's a big gap in gender-related capacities. And is there in Trinidad and Tobago some particular area where you feel, okay, this is where capacity building is important, whether it is a theme or whether it is in the process of doing, more integrated learning, whatever it may be?
I think it's all of them. Capacity building, I think, is a term that's bandied around, but it's not really put into practice as effectively as it should be. As we speak, tomorrow we're supposed to be doing a CAP on capacity building with respect to climate change. And this is a CARI Forum, which is the Caribbean regions that consultants are, organizing it. Because we really need to know, this was done in 2004, but that's a long time ago. We really need to know how people feel, what they know about climate change, first of all. How does it impact them? And the gender-related aspects, how does it impact women? How does it impact children, men? People from the private sector, which is also very important, manufacturers and so on. So I think to answer your question, capacity building is needed or is lacking in many components of society.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you very much. So,
what you asked.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've clarified. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks very much for that, Marcia. And I think there was one thing you mentioned also. You said, we need to know what people know about climate change, what they feel. And I think also that's super important, how people respond to that. Marcena, over to you to hear your perspective.
Yes. Thank you, Daniel. I'm here mostly to listen and learn because we need to take into account the outcomes of the Durban Forum in further PCCB work, and we will definitely dissect the outcomes in order to follow up in a useful way. However, what I wanted to refer to were comments made by Mr. Gupta about reliability of information that's available in the public domain. And I think that the best way is to look at the executive summaries for the work of the IPCC, because of course the full report is too massive to expect just ordinary people that are not working on climate issues to delve into, but executive summaries have 38 pages, if you go through the working group outcomes, and there's always relevant and more or less balanced knowledge, which is presenting, the compendium of wisdom on what's going on, and it's constantly updated. At the moment, IPCC is preparing the 6th report, and I'm sure that we will be able to find a lot of relevant information, which is really in the form of executive summary, digestible for ordinary citizen. Another thing that I wanted quickly to cover is as well this notion who to trust, and we know that now it became very fashionable in the corporate world, to claim green credentials, and as usual we have to be really, I would say, it's great to collaborate with business, but when they are asking NGOs or other people's movements for collaboration, you really need to look into the background to see whether really these green policies are as green as they claim, because as usual we know that it can be I wouldn't mention which companies, but we know that there are some companies which live off fossil fuels that are claiming to becoming green, and it is very much like tobacco companies in the past that were also trying to do a lot of research and trying to ensure that people thought that smoking wasn't really relevant for various things. So I think that it's always important. So where to look for finance? I think that international organizations are the best sources of finance, and there are a lot of various grants that grassroots movements can apply for, because obviously people need some support to pay for communication and so on, and without money you can't do much. So this would be my, as I say, comment on this intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcena. And by the way, I think maybe a lot of people here know you, but just to confirm that you are with the PCCB, I believe you're one of the leads of the PCCB, but I don't know if you want to say
well,
that.
I'm the outgoing co-chair, because as you know, every year we select 2 co-chairs among ourselves, and I've been co-chair for 3 consecutive years. And it's time for me to move on and let another colleague to take over. But I'm happy to tell you that I'm going to be a gender focal point for the PCCB from this meeting, and I'm also a lead on working group 3, which is communication and stakeholder engagement. So I hope I will still be meeting a lot of you in the context of the PCCB network and also in the capacity building hubs. And my term will end a year after that, because all our terms were extended because of the 2020 break in negotiations. So you will see it's unusual situation for the PCCB to have 5-year and 6-year terms for members.
All right, well, thanks for that info, and good luck with your new positions. That sounds great, Marcena. I think really important points, and I just want to make one comment, and it is that also, also Marcena pointed out the importance of IPCC information, summaries that are there, and I think, also Marcia and Vishal, and by the way, I'm using your first name. I hope that's okay, just to keep it a little bit rolling. But I think also, the point that you raised about stakeholder being part of that knowledge production is important. And I think maybe there's something to say there between openness to this other type of understanding of visions of climate change, the ethical point that Vishal brought up. Okay, I would like us to now move, and I'm not going to say to the second, but to the third question. Okay, so let's go now to the third, because I think we've heard about the second a bit. Let's think for a couple of minutes in silence about what we can learn from actions and policies that exist there, whether it is a project, whether it is a grassroots movement, whether it is a policy, that have delivered co-benefits for both development and climate objectives. So we're talking here co-benefits, right? We're looking at SDGs, we're talking about climate at the same time. So what are some examples of work, again, could be policy or could be a project, could be an initiative, that is actually working maybe in the countries that you are working in or you're representing, that are producing co-benefits, that are working for climate action, but also are delivering other development-related objectives around water, around reduction of poverty, around gender equality. We are looking for those examples. So a couple of minutes to you. And please do feel free to use the Padlet again. I'll ask Max again to just share the link there. Click into that, and then you just, on the third column, click on that little plus sign, and then you can just quickly or briefly type your input. I'll give you 2 minutes by the clock, and then we'll come back and have another discussion. Okay, we have another minute. I'm not seeing comments yet there, so feel free to, it doesn't have to be a fully formed idea, just what you're thinking about. Maybe even list the name of a project that you think potentially is delivering co-benefit, but you're not even sure. So you could then we could explore that. Or a policy that you feel is set up to do a good job, but so far it hasn't shown results. That's also good. We can explore. Okay. While you're still, collecting your ideas, I also would like to ask you to kind of frame it in the context of what we are discussing now, which is capacity building, right? Capacity strengthening, learning. So when you think about these projects, these ideas, also, we're seeing examples here: technologies, agriculture, policies, energy sector. It's not just the let's say the content of the project, the technology within the project, but also how is this reflected in capacity strengthening, so that helps us move forward, right? So there's a hand up. Let me see who it is. Thanks for that, Alejandra. Alejandra, over to you to share your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Daniel. I wanted to speak about something that I have been working on. I work as capacity building and finance advisor for ILAC. But also in recent months, I worked in a study on how to implement, or basically to see how Article 2.1c is being implemented or not in Colombia. And Article 2.1c refers to the consistency of financial flows with decarbonization and resilience. And it's, I would say, kind of the forgotten goal of the Paris Agreement. If you look about the three long-term goals, Article 2.1a, b, and c, 1a being the one on 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees. So everyone talks about that one. People talk about adaptation, and very little people are talking about this consistency of financial flows. So what we did by looking at this is try to understand how the public flows and the private flows are in line to be consistent with Paris or not. And what we found is that there is really little understanding of climate change and the benefits of climate action, both in the public and private sector. So in the private sector and the financial sector in particular, they do have some understanding of SDGs. But even if the Paris Agreement is a legally binding agreement, they have even less knowledge of how to align their flows to Paris. And this was really worrisome, because in the end, the financial sector being the major driver of the economy, they are not mainstreaming climate change as part of their investment decisions. So that was one thing. The other thing that we saw is that there are two things of how we can manage climate change as part of investments, right? So one is as a risk, and as it happens in Colombia, it happens in many other countries. There is a really big economic dependence to fossil fuels, to the fossil fuel industry. So in Colombia, for example, there is a huge part of the exports of the country, 60%, comes from fossil fuels. So even if their energy matrix, let's say their energy mix is clean, there is an economic dependence of these incomes to the country and to public investments. So you have to see climate change both as a risk, because you can create stranded assets in the long run if you don't start to have these investments and these sources for public budgeting from other sources, from like with economic diversification, and not only from coal, but also as an opportunity, so that we can create different jobs and eradicate poverty at the same time. So I think I want to close with this. I see that the planning departments and the finance ministries have not yet enter into this dynamic of mainstreaming climate change as part of their planning processes. And sometimes they see it more like a risk of not doing what they have to do in the short term, rather than a risk that can have an impact in the long run in the economy. Yeah, so that was my input over.
Well, thanks very much, Alejandra. Really interesting stuff what you mentioned. And before moving to the next, can I ask you, like, in a sentence, just for everyone, so that we're all on the same page here, when you talk about the consistency of financial flows, what do you mean by consistency? What do you think, or what is meant by consistency? So that we're just clear, we're talking about different scales and the consistency. Is it about, I'll leave it to you to explain it.
Yeah, actually there is no definition of consistency, but it basically would mean that investments, public and private investments, are meant to either reduce emissions, avoid emissions, or strengthen resilience in each country.
Okay, thanks very much, Alejandra. Again, thanks very much. So I've seen, meanwhile, a few comments. There's a comment from Marcia again. There's another point, I think, here that is going towards the idea of finding, I think it's relevant because we're talking about knowledge, learning, a bit of a mixture. You're mentioning here in the last comment, agroecology, rediscovering traditional ways of housing, agriculture. So that kind of marriage of the knowledges, right? From, technical, local, indigenous, what we don't normally associate with the predominant disciplines that contribute to forming and shaping, let's say, an IPCC report. So I wonder if there's something to be said around co-benefits, making sure that a project is comprehensive, and at the same time, does it mean that it's more inclusive of the whole set of knowledges that I just talked about? So if anyone would like to chip in on this, agree, disagree, very welcome.
Hi, Daniel. Can I make a point, Vishal?
Yes, Vishal, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I agree with Marzena, when she says that finance is an integral part of any venture which humans take, and of course climate change cannot be any different. But somehow, maybe I'm wrong, I do get a feeling that climate change cannot be an investment opportunity. It cannot be a financial opportunity, right? I see climate finance more as a philanthropic venture. So why do I say this? When I hear people talking about climate finance, I see a lot of people talking about emissions trading and talking amongst each other that, it's a good thing to invest because you'll get 300% returns. Now my question is that anything which gives you returns will have it's more existential question. It's a philosophical question, not a technical one. Anything that gives you profit will have greed, right? So how do we balance this out, And do we have in our teams philosophers who are core ethics trained people, masters in ethics or masters in philosophy, who may help? Though, finally the person who has the money has the power. But at least, we tell everybody, we show everybody some kind of direction, and we hope that everybody comes on the same path and starts walking together. So this is the question, it's kind of opinion and a question actually.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Vishal. I think it's a really pertinent, really important point. I think, it's true. It has a philosophical element, but it's important to address this philosophical element within our discussions of climate change. We cannot just go to operational, to the bottom line. We have to address those points. So thanks so much for bringing that up. And I think that really is a nice segue into the fourth and our final question, which is a little bit, what you were talking about, Vishal, what you've all been talking about. What skills are needed and who needs them? Because the other assumption that tends to be is like capacity strengthening, capacity building is always for a certain group of people, limited group of people, either, local governments or community members. It tends to be an idea behind it that, certain ways of understanding the problem and the issue have to be taught to the operational level. But maybe there's more than that, right? What we're talking about here. So who needs to have these skills, and what are the skills that are needed in order, again, to really move into initiatives, policies that work for a multiple or a diversity of developmental goals, not just climate? That's what we are trying to come up with now. So I leave that question up to you. Again, in the Padlet, feel free to start populating it. But also, because we don't have much time left, just feel free, and you're very welcome to come in. Feel free to come in and just say, what are those skills without having to, you don't necessarily have to give a full explanation, but what are those skills? I'm really interested, for example, are we talking about, we need more climate modelers or we need more partnerships between the meteorological agencies and local governments so that early warning systems work better. Or, picking up on Vishal's comments, we need to have a lot more, maybe humanities type of knowledge integrated into the thinking about what are the priorities to guide our policies and our strategies on climate change. So with that, really over to you to chip in on your thoughts. And meanwhile, someone has just posted a comment, how do we ensure technical knowledge parity among nations? It's true, I find that often there's countries getting a lot of support for capacity building objectives, or even just climate adaptation more in general, resilience, and others are really struggling to access them. It has to do with something that someone mentioned around the difficulty in accessing those funds right in the proposals. I think in the panel, maybe the person from GIZ, Lena, brought this up, if I remember correctly. So that's also part of the discussion, right? What do you think about this? Okay, so I think time is kind of the essence now, in the sense of we're having to wrap it up. I feel I've talked more than I should have, but if you'd like to make a final say something in relation to the fourth question, or just a final thought on this discussion, please do come in. Oh yeah, Marcia Tinto, over back to you.
Yes, sorry about talking so much, but
not at all.
I'm looking at this last question, and I'm saying that many of these skills or these deliverables are implemented in our country, but I think the main problem is communication, lack of communication. So you may have the co-benefits going on through government and private sector and NGOs, because I think it was discussed before about the private sector or companies, for example, through their social responsibility, what we call greenwashing. So they do, a project and say, okay, we're dealing or treating with climate change. But I think the communication is very, very important, because very often there's something really significant going on, and people who ought to be involved or should know are not involved. So I think that's one of the biggest problems. And secondly, and this is what I think most people are saying all over, including in our country, there's a lot of focus on mitigation, but not enough on adaptation. Mm-hmm. And that really has to be addressed.
Definitely. Agree. Thanks very much, Marcia, for that. Vishal, the last word for you, and then we'll wrap it up to take the 5-minute break before we go back into the plenary.
Right, thanks. I just have a request that maybe in future some kind of a discussion could be taken up for inclusion of people from ethics background into SBIs and Sebesta committees also. I feel because when I've attended these, I haven't seen people, though they are technical experts, full marks and credits to them and their knowledge. But sometimes I feel we need in artificial intelligence, we don't only need programmers, we also need humanities. Similarly, in any venture, we need humanities. I think this should be thought about.
And Vishal, you mentioned which group of people to bring into the discussion?
The subsidiary body implementation and subsidiary body technical and scientific.
Sure, but which people were you hoping to bring into those fora?
The people who have formal education in ethics and philosophy.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Max. Also, Max has just informed us we will be reconvening in the main room at 4 p.m., meaning in 7 minutes. And before this, there will be a 5-minute break. So I think, Max, do we have to wrap it now, or do we have a couple of minutes for?
No, so I think we need to wrap up now so that we have a moment to consolidate all the notes to report back, and then the participants can take a short break and stay in the same room where we will reconvene at 4.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for your participation. Thanks, Max, for guiding us here, and see you in 5 minutes. See you in 5 minutes in the plenary. Thanks again.
Dear participants, welcome back. Before we move on to the next agenda items, let's play a trivia. Please go again to menti.com and enter the same code as we did before. This is the 454571114. I will ask you 2 questions that you will answer in Menti. Due to the cross-cutting nature of climate action, there are many socioeconomic activities that are addressed in NDCs. The tool previously presented by Dr. Clara Brandy has assessed those activities that gather them in several themes, such as education, infrastructure, resource efficiency, or energy, among others. I see that many of you have started already the quiz, but for those that are not, please submit your answers. Please select those 3 most prominent themes in countries in NDCs. Yeah. Okay, we see energy is in the top. Maybe ecosystems, not that much. All right. Let's just wait a few seconds. Okay, now finance is leading a little bit more. Okay, so I will tell you the correct answers are water, agriculture, and energy. Yeah, all these activities do not only relate to climate action, but also to the implementation of multiple sustainable development goals. In fact, many NDC climate activities entail synergies that can promote several SDGs at once. Now let's dip into those activities and explore the synergies between the climate and sustainable development agendas. For instance, energy. And the next question is, which of the following SDGs have most interlinks with energy-related activities in NDCs? We have 4 options, and you have to choose one. So the first one is gender equality, industry, innovation, infrastructure, clean water and sanitation, or no poverty. So please choose the SDG that you find that you think is the correct answer to this question. Okay, so we see that industry is definitely winning this trivia so far. Let's just wait a few seconds more. Also, we have some participants that answer that clean water is the correct answer. Clean water and sanitation, both of them. Okay. Let's just wait a little bit more. We have more answers. One more for industry. Okay, so I will tell you that the real answer, the correct answer is gender equality indeed. So there are many SDGs that have many synergies with energy-related activities. For instance, the SDG number 11 that tackles sustainable cities and communities. But other SDGs, such as gender equality, has many interlinks with energy-related activities. For instance, in many countries, women bear the greatest burden to collect biomass that will be used to cook. This labor is generally unpaid, and it's often linked with air pollution that will mostly affect these women. Therefore, having a source of reliable and clean energy can contribute to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, but also creates the co-benefits for enhancing women's lives and achieve the gender equality goals. Thank you very much for participating in this trivia. I hope that you enjoy it and that maybe you're a little bit surprised. And now I'm going to hand it over to Shanaz. Shanaz, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Victor. So first of all, thank you to all of you for, I think we're going now into the 3rd hour and everyone is still here. So well done to all of us. In this session, we'll be looking at feedback from the great breakout groups. We'll take about 20 minutes. And what I'd like to do now is to invite each of the group leaders to feedback. We'll go in order of the groups. So we'll start with group 1, which was Vosita. So Vosita, over to you. So you'll present for about, if there's 4 groups, about just over 5, say 7.5 minutes. And again, as before, I'll put my camera on, so just so we can be fair to everyone. So over to you, Vasita.
So thank you very much. It was an interesting discussion, and we had a lot of examples, I would say, about what people wanted to illustrate for these 3 questions as answers. So the first one on how to effectively integrate scientific evidence. Some of the answers we had focused on developing a connection between the universities and policymakers to mainstream climate change issues. Then development of a common agenda, or having a common agenda between politicians, lawmakers, and academicians to put forward climate change in the national context as a priority. And then also increasing and enhancing the literacy of policymakers on climate change and the need for climate action, and using common language to stress the importance of coordination between the sectors. There was also a point on how youth scientists could also contribute to the scientific process, and also giving them the opportunity to engage in national processes. That was also made as part of this question. Going to question 2, the capacity gaps in integrating climate change, integrating climate change or climate policies into economic sectors. So one was the technical expertise that was highlighted to ensure that this action could happen, that is integrating climate action into economic sectors. Then on developing robust logic to influence policymakers to integrate substantial budgetary arrangements. So there are examples on the need for budgets and the importance of allocating finance for climate action in different sectors, which was discussed. Then there was also an example of how climate modeling is important, the need for that, the capacity building of this, so that countries, especially LDCs, could have long-term climate models that could predict or integrate climate risks and hazards into decision-making related to economic sectors. And then on building capacities, on inclusive and participatory processes, and also national ownership and engagement of private sector. One was about awareness, the raising of awareness of stakeholders about the importance of their engagement and their role in this process. And then also setting up a regulatory body so that national government could have multiple stakeholders involved in the process. And then capacity building or scaling up, and urgently scaling up capacity building of multiple stakeholders. And recognizing the actions that are being taken by the private sector, because there are actions that are there, but also building on these and enhancing actions and contributions that they make to the processes that we're discussing today. I hope that we took everything in, and there was also a point that was made, which I think we missed inputting on this slide, about the impacts of COVID-19 and how this could be taken as an opportunity to actually bring economic sectors into climate action, as well as engaging different stakeholders in enhancing climate action. So I think we have presented all the discussed points, and I'm very thankful for everyone who gave their best in the group work, as well as to our rapporteur, Arifin, who's consulting for the UNFCCC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosita. So I'm going to now look to Dr. Fofana for group 2.
Thank you.
Are you there? Yes, you're there.
I'm
Thank
here.
you.
I'm just probably sharing our screen with that. Just a second. We'll be having that first. While I'm waiting, I would like to just thank you to the member of the group for the question. Very useful insight, and also experience that they shared during that discussion. So on our working group, we have 3 main questions that we're trying to answer. One is linked to the capacity building play to strengthen an institutional system and incorporate climate change action in the National Development Plan. There's one consensus that the capacity of the decision makers, mostly high-profile people, ministry, prime minister, must be strengthened and ensure the seamless coordination with people in the field because there is some kind of disconnection with the decision maker and technician in the field. So they would like really to see how we can support and build the capacity of the decision maker to understand what is going on in the field and how they can link into the policy and strengthen the plan as well. The second point is that the groups mentioned that the angle that we have on how we position climate change in institutions sometimes create issues, because framing climate change as a development issues and not as an environment issues is important, because the fact of most of the country, they see climate change issues as environmental issues, and other institutional or other ministry will not consider that as something really important. This will reduce really the institutional fragmentation, and because most of the ministry will work as in silo, which is not really good to have something more collectively way. The third thing and the last one that they mentioned is that the future leaders and the network must be strengthened, because the work we are currently doing, if the future leaders that are not understanding, the pro and cons and how they can play a positive role on that, then our work will be not really considered as it is. So the point that the group mentioned is that how we can support the future leaders through capacity buildings, through academia, and help them to really have enough knowledge and tools to play the role that they're supposed to play in a certain way. The second question is, what are the capacity gaps at the subnational and local level to implement climate policy? There is some point that mentioned from the group that there is a really clear evidence that there is a disconnect between the national level and the subnational local level. And there are some barriers sometimes that affect that part. One is the language barriers, because most of the local, let's say, municipality, they're not really well educated, but they know exactly what they're doing in a certain way. But when people come with complex approach, they're not seeing themselves. And also making the connection with concrete and constituting subnational local level, because most of the local and the subnational, they are not seeing themselves at the national plan, because they see there's no link what they're doing at the municipality level. And the way to do is how we can build the capacity to the national level, have some approach, making sure that the local level are taken into consideration and make that connection with concrete result. And there is a need to have a case study, with best practice, an example that can work and show them what they can do in a certain way. And one point to mention is academia and network have existing international and national connection will be developed, right? Generate a network of university, of academia around climate change, how they can integrate more curricula that link to that to support really that part of the capacity building. The last question is about the turnover, the challenge regarding to that, and also how they can be, this capacity will be used in a certain way. And people mentioned that building the capacity of the new staff and have a handover process, because most of the issues in such an institution, there is no handover process. And when the new staff come, they need also to restart again and, starting to learn again, it is a wasting of time. And when it's come to work with the new staff, there's a lot of issues on, helping them to up to speed. So that process, building the capacity of the new staff and also making sure that the handover process will have really to reduce the burden at that point. And the second point was really important for the group as well, is that they said focal points should be not individual, but should be a group of people or an institution. Because when you just choose one person to ensure the retention, sometimes it's not good when the person left or when the person is really, overload in terms of initiative. It's good to have a group of person that have the same knowledge, the same training, and respond as the focal points to serve well the role and then they do. So that's let's say the summary of what we conclude under the breakout group 2. And again, thank you so much for the group for the insight and the excellent contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm going to hand over to group 3 now. That's you, Lena.
Thank you so much, Shinaz. I can share it, or Eva, would you share the presentation? Just a second. That's the technical issues. Just give me a second and I'll share the presentation. Does it work? Yeah, thank you so much, Eva. Thanks for the support. Eva has been supporting me in my breakout session. Great. Yes, thank you so much for the colleagues who joined my group. We've been discussing 3 questions on building capacity to align national climate and SDG-relevant targets. So on the first question, we looked at where focal points are located within different ministries, within different sectors. So there are certain constraints and the lack of communication because of these different locations of focal point for the different agendas. And also zooming into the SDG targets, of course, there's much more complexity that we need to look at, and not only at the SDG targets, but as we have to take a look at every topic. And so bringing together these different focal points is difficult, because these are people and we're talking about individuals, but also we're talking about systems and institutions, of course. And we heard this in the previous presentation, that focal points cannot be individuals, but should be rather a group of people to retain that knowledge. And we looked at that as well, retaining knowledge. I'll get to that in a second. We see that it's critical to build capacities at the institutional level, not only at the individual level. We as JSZ also see that there's the individual level, the institutional level, and also we have the systemic societal level. So it is critical to build capacities on all levels in order to get these synergies. We also see that the climate change agenda and other agendas, for example, the biodiversity agenda, which oftentimes are in the same ministry, in the Ministry of Environment, are not even linked. So if we look at SDGs, we have to dig a bit deeper and see, so who is responsible for pushing forward this agenda, and then see how we can bring these people together. And also, it has been one experience of this whole of society approach that when all participants and stakeholders are at the table, there's a lot of cooperative learning. So that's also connected to the linkage of these synergies, of these different agendas. We see that it's important to have these interlinkages at the international level, to find synergies, to have peer-to-peer learning, to maybe also use blueprints, methods, instruments that have been tried out at the national level, and then also bring to the international level. It opens up a space for exchanging experience of similar national contexts, for example, SIDS, and can help develop integrated projects and programs, and peer-to-peer learning can work as an avenue to facilitate retention of capacities at the institutional level, and that could be North-South and South-South cooperation. And it can also be helpful to contribute to synergies at project level, but also at the policy level. So what are the capacity gaps for coherent monitoring and evaluation? We saw that not only is the systemic approach at the 3 capacity building levels important, but also at the regional and the local level. So we see that it's vertical and horizontal integration that is necessary in order to have this current monitoring and evaluation. We see that there's a need for technical expertise and funding. We've talked a lot about data management and MRV systems as well. But also peer learning processes for monitoring and evaluation across different sectors can be possible. And also we looked at the methodology of to measure contribution of non-state actors, but also on the municipal level. And our colleague from Italy shared some of their learnings that they had with ICLAI and the Covenant of Mayors, which I find is a very interesting learning process from Italy that can surely also be used for other countries. The next slide, please. And then the third question, we tackled cooperative learning for decision makers that are in charge of implementing sustainable development and climate agendas. And again, we came back to the vertical and the horizontal level and looked at, okay, how do we bring these together? And if these people are, these individuals at the same table, something happens, right? Synergy comes in, and you all know this, we're sitting all at home, but once we're at the same table, we have even more fruitful discussions and shared ownership of these processes, and cooperative learning goes beyond the sole meeting that we're having, but also goes on after that. So we see that cooperative learning also is necessary on a global level. As JSZ, we're supporting the NAP Global Network, for example, the NEC partnership, and we see that there's a lot of exchange, especially on South-South, but also North-South and South-North. So participatory learning, where different methods and instruments are shared and scaled up in another country, also via these platforms and learning networks, And we see that it's interesting to have government officials or individuals and other stakeholders to work on national challenges together, and not only looking at the climate change challenge, but also, as I think Male has said before, looking at climate change as a development agenda and not as an environmental aspect or problem even. And then we also talked a bit about the implementation and investment planning for NDCs, because when we look at this in a coherent and integrated manner, SDGs are also incorporated in this and can be integrated so that cooperative learning can also be used across the board, and not only for the NDCs or for investment planning and budgeting for climate mitigation, but also adaptation and sustainable development. Thank you so much. I'm giving back to the moderators.
Thank you. And last we have Daniel, Group 4. Hi, Daniel. It's been a long time. Nice to see you again. Very nice. Yes, over to you, Daniel.
Nice to see you too, Shanaz. Thanks, everyone. So for our breakout group discussion, which was focused on co-benefits, I'd like to pick up on one of Lena's last points, which was the idea of climate change as a development agenda, right? And how complicated also, how natural it is in a way, but also how difficult it is sometimes to, whereas there is a lot of complementarity in what different stakeholders think about pushing the climate change or climate action agenda forward, there's a lot of complementarities in what different sectors, different stakeholders want to do, but there's also a number of clashing points, and those we explored in our group discussion. And, not just in relation to climate, to capacity building or capacity strengthening, but also maybe in the way of framing the issue, the way that, understanding what exactly are the priorities, what are the problems. In doing that framing, in understanding what topics, what knowledges even also to bring to the table, and which knowledges maybe are, is there such a thing as a prioritization of knowledge? Is it a valid question even to ask? These are the things that I sense came up a lot in our discussion. So in the first question around what gaps in knowledge and learning are blocking progress on the SDGs, I'll just mention a couple of points. I won't go through everything, but there's a sense that the predominant knowledge tends to be overly technical, and that makes it difficult sometimes to relate or meaningful at local levels, at grassroots levels. Now, it doesn't mean, of course, that the implication here is that probably there is a prioritization of certain knowledges that are not so digestible at local level, and I think that's an issue to address as well. So the point here being, let's make sure that grassroots knowledge, grassroots level indigenous knowledge is part of the mix, is part of the way that knowledge is put together, is cooked, and is presented. Policy is an important element of the puzzle, but not always a driver. For me, this was an interesting thing that came in our discussion. So focus on the process, focus on the inclusion. People were saying always get input from stakeholders. A government representative was saying, we need to know what people know about climate change in order to understand, not only, and I mean people, I mean all stakeholders, in order to understand where the gaps are, but also, what they feel, how they respond, what are the differentiated impacts. And really understanding this properly is the only way to really then address what are the gaps that are blocking progress on developing co-benefits and advancing on all of the SDGs. There was an issue around knowledge today. Is it obsolete tomorrow? Or, the obsolescence of knowledge over time. But that's why bodies like the IPCC exist, to try to bring all this together. And again, here we came to, that realizing that's a major achievement. And at the same time, does that also mean that some of the knowledge, some of the more like grassroots, humanities, ethical understandings of the problematic, are those left out of the mainstream conversations, and what can be done to overcome that? On the second one, in achievements, I'll come back to the idea of IPCC executive reports, as really important way for people and for decision makers to advance and move ahead with a, important level playing field. And again, the involvement of a wide range of stakeholders in policy development and implementation, which is easy to say. We've said it for millions, I don't know millions, but for decades, but it's still an important message. And if we go to the next one to come to our final discussions, what can we learn from actions and policies? Aligning public and private finance flows to climate objectives. So let's not just look at the climate risks, but focusing on what are the opportunities, job creation, poverty reduction, how can that also be a driver for advancing the priorities and the policies. The idea, as we mentioned, of rediscovering sources, I say rediscovering because these are maybe just the knowledge are there, the disciplines are there, but they are not central enough perhaps to the climate and development centers of discussion. So let's bring those back, and we're talking again really more meaningfully bring indigenous traditional knowledge, but also, the idea, as some people brought up around, again, what does it mean for an adaptation or a climate initiative to be relevant, and to be meaningful? Does it have to equate to the idea that it makes a business case? Well, there was an opposition to this idea. Maybe it shouldn't be a business case what makes a good climate action. Maybe it's more about the ethical part of it. It's not you cannot assign a monetary value to understanding what is a good adaptation or a mitigation way forward. And in doing that, again, we say this because it does link to the learning, to the knowledge, because it does mean that the assumptions that have been built in order to understand what a good climate action is may have to be slightly widened in order to incorporate all these ethical, even philosophical, but very grounded ideas of what should drive us forward in terms of climate action and climate priorities. And finally, in terms of what skills are needed, just saying what other colleagues said around before, the horizontal and vertical integrations, communication among stakeholders, still proving to be a challenge. The integration of knowledge, as we said, from humanities, from ethical perspectives, insufficient understanding of what it means to achieve co-benefits. And this was, I think, a very interesting input from a participant around, she claims from her research basically that there's this gap still. What does it mean to achieve co-benefits? And here again, we maybe come to the initial departure point. Where do we, from a stakeholder A, stakeholder B, see the success of a climate action or, a development policy going? Is it about then, what do you identify as the co-benefits? Is it improving on gender equality, for example, or is it really making sure that, emissions are reduced by X%? So understanding, where the co-benefits are and having the opportunity to communicate between stakeholders to say, okay, let's maybe not agree from day one, but maybe on day 10, we will agree that we want to move in this direction and and compromise at some point to identify and understand the other party's co-benefit with the idea of what their co-benefits might mean, or what their benefits mean, what your benefits mean, and where can we meet middle ground. So that process is seen as really important, Shenaz. And I think actually, I'll leave it at that because the final point we already mentioned. But really as a final sentence, stakeholder engagement is really chaotic, can be chaotic. Revision of assumptions, taking a step back can be a chaotic, scary step. But it seemed from our discussion that it's a helpful step. It's a way to be more genuinely inclusive and move forward the discussion in a happy way for a wide set of stakeholders involved. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Daniel. So we're moving into the closing of the session now, and I'll just spend about two and a half minutes just giving you some of my reflections. I'll then hand over to Makoto, and then we'll close up. Firstly, I just want to thank everyone for sticking with the session for 3 hours. I mean, the virtual space is not easy to navigate, but we're all still here, so well done to all of us. And I think what has opened up is that the virtual space has meant that we have people present who would not have been there otherwise. So I think, so for that, I think I'm really grateful. And then in terms of what is coming out, I think what I hear clearly is that and I know it's come up in a lot of the work that we've also been doing as CDKN and South North, is this about viewing climate change as a development agenda. I think it's a real challenge to all of us, and it's something that we can take to our work, but they can also go in the report and take it forward to the PCCB. What I also heard clearly from everyone is that language can be an issue, and that we need a common language, and it needs to be simple so that there's no issues that emerge from that. And then on a bigger level, what's coming across is that there needs to be some sort of alignment of systems, retention within these systems. We need integration across the systems, vertically, horizontally. And then there's an opportunity to look out for pilots and best practice that can be shared and celebrated, and particularly pulling the learnings from that and sharing and celebrating that and using them as inspiration for other countries, other organizations and institutions. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Makoto now, but I want to thank you all again. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Shanaz. And also, I would like to echo my appreciation, echo the Shanaz's comments to appreciate all the participants and the Secretariat. Today, we had a discussion, very important discussion of having NDC climate related work, or LTS, others and also integration of development goals. And I think it's very important to consider the alignment and the integration because, for example, NDCs and climate change, climate action is not; these are not standalone. And so, in this regard, we actually saw lots of good cases, tools, and so we had a sharing of lots of challenges and opportunities. And we really appreciate all the contributions coming from panelists, presenters, as well as those who made intervention in the middle of the plenary session and group out discussions. I am under the impression that, we are still in the middle of somewhere. We're still, there are lots of things we need to do more. And I think in this regard, we're happy to continue this kind of interaction and also mutual learning and involving people who can join us for our work. Nobody should left behind, and we should actually inclusively realize climate actions and also sustainable development. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us to share our efforts, and then I hope this kind of discussion should be continued for further actions. So thank you very much. And then finally, I would like to hand over to my dear colleagues with Daniela Violetti, Director of the Means of Implementation Division at the UNFCCC Secretariat, who give us a few words to close this meeting. So over to you, Daniela.
Thank you, Makoto, and good day to all participants. And indeed, it's wonderful to see so many participants following the forum, and especially as was said that at the very end of a long 3-hour session. But this is just a testimony that addressing climate change is a really international priority, and particularly when dealing with issues as important as building capacity to address climate and development goals coherently. So looking back a bit since the establishment of the Durban Forum in 2011, this has been a platform for parties, representatives, constituted bodies under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, relevant expert practitioners to share their experience and exchange ideas, best practices, lessons learned on the implementation of capacity building activities in the context of specific thematic areas. This role was further strengthened with the establishment of the PCCB, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, and the thematic alignment of the Durban Forum with the focus area on the theme of the PCCB. This was an important step as well. And today's discussion highlighted how important a building block for capacity building is to addressing climate and development goals. So we heard from panelists and participants on the necessity to mainstream climate and development goals into policy planning and identify capacity gaps and needs that could impede the coherent implementation of both and hinder a sustainable recovery. So as countries continue communicating their updated NDCs ahead of COP26 this year, and governments led efforts on the 2030 agenda, I believe that the discussion we had today was important in shedding light on the work that lies ahead. This is all very, very critical for the process itself of climate change, of course, but in broad sense for the development agenda as well. So the outcome of the discussion was mentioned, will be presented at the 5th meeting of the PCCB. The PCCB will then take stock of this outcome and use them to assist in the identification of concrete action points and recommendation to the COP on issues relevant to the topics addressed today. So finally, let me also, on behalf of the Secretariat, express my appreciation and gratitude to all participants, panelists, group leaders, for taking the time out of your busy schedules, of course, and attending the forum, and to our co-facilitators for their excellent job in facilitating. So let me just close that reaffirming that the Durban Forum has been and will continue to be an important part of the capacity building arrangements established under the Convention. So for now, I can only thank you again, and I will invite both Srinath and Makoto to proceed with the closing of the 10th Durban Forum. Thanks again on behalf of the Secretariat and the full capacity building team. Thank you very much.
Makoto, over to you to close the session.
Okay. Now, so we are finally closing the session, and then for the as you see the screen will please go back to the menti.com, and then also please describe this 10th Durban Forum in one word. So we are having lots of nice words: enlightening, collaborative, learning. So perhaps what we can do, we have some more. Informative, great, enlightening. Okay. So I think this is really encouraging, and I hope we can do. We hope this is going to be a really good input to the further our efforts in the UNFCCC process and also implementation at home. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Daniele.